Well, thank you very much. It looks like you're more committed to food security issues by staying here longer. So what I'm going to present here is how are we going to protect the poor people against the price volatility. As we know, for the last 2 or 3 years, global food prices have risen at least twice, one in 2007, 2008, and one in 2010, since June 2010. So food crisis in the last 2 or 3 years. Now I have 4 key messages for you. The first one is food price hikes and volatility are increasingly frequent. The second is a complex web of factors drive food. The third, high and volatile food prices hurt poor consumers and producers. Finally, we needed to take urgent actions to protect the poor against price volatility. This figure shows you that in the last 2 or 3 years, the maize price, wheat price, and the rice price have become higher and more volatile. So since June 2010, the wheat price has doubled and the maize price has doubled. So the prices have increased not only at the global level, but more importantly at the national level. If you see this chart, you will see that in many African countries, particularly the countries in the region, have experienced rapid food price increase in the last 3 years, particularly during 2007, 2008 food price hikes. For Senegal, rice price doubled. Rice price doubled in 2007, 2008, so during the global food price hike. This is also true in Cameroon, in Ethiopia, as well as Niger. The food price volatility is driven by many factors. The first is stronger link between oil and food prices. Whenever there is a higher oil price, and there is a higher food price. So the correlation between oil price and the food price have increased over time. In the 80s, 90s, the correlation coefficient between oil and food prices was about 0.4%, definitely less than 0.5%. Less than 0.4, definitely less than 0.5. But in the last decade, that correlation coefficient has increased to 0.7 to 0.8. So you have seen increased correlation between food and oil prices. And the extreme weather events such as droughts, floods, and cyclones have led to severe production losses and trade restrictions. You remember in 2007, 2008, because of the trade restrictions in Asia, China, India, Cambodia, Thailand, all these trade restrictions exacerbated global food prices. Then market speculation. So there is some sort of a debate about whether speculation has really played a role in the global food price increase. Although the evidence is still very weak, but we have to pay attention to this issue, whether the speculation will really compromise poor people's food security. And finally, obviously in the long run, the climate change will hit agriculture production very hard, and particularly in this region, Sahel region, will be hit very severely by the climate change in the future. As I said, a stronger link between oil and food prices, almost perfect correlation there. The rising oil prices cause food prices through 2 major channels. The one is through increased cost of production. The second is the expansion of biofuel production. So when oil price reached to $70, $80 per barrel, the biofuel production become economically viable by converting maize and other grains into ethanol. Now the oil price is more than $100 per barrel. Even without subsidy, the biofuel production is economically viable. Just for the United States alone, more than 40% of the corn or maize production is used for biofuel production. So that accounts for a large share of the global maize production. So the US maize used for biofuel production is even larger than total production of China, which is the 2nd largest producer in the world. the climate change will add more pressure to global food security. So in this region, without anything else, the yield of major crops will be lost by 10 to 20%. And because of climate change, we will see increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, such as droughts and floods. And it will lower agriculture yields and production, and it will cause higher food prices. So IFPRI study showed that during the food crisis, many people feel food insecure. Look at the figure in Senegal. So in 2007, 2008, the people here feel food insecure almost doubled because of the rapid increase of rice price. So the rice price increased more than 100%. And the rice price increase also trickled or spilled over to other prices, maize, wheat, cassava. This is not unique for Senegal. Many other countries, Cameroon, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, have seen increased food insecurity. So we need urgent actions to tackle the global food security issues when food prices continue to rise. So the first is to invest in social protection to protect the poor, to set up a social protection to protect the women and the children during food crisis. The second is to establish a global and a regional strategic grain reserves. So how we can really work together to create a reserve that can help the poorest region and the poorest country. So we'll come back this later. And during crisis, we have to make sure that trade remains to be open, fair, and transparent. And fourth, we need to continue to promote smallholders' agriculture productivity because smallholders account for 70%, 80% of poor in the world. And clearly, we needed to invest in climate change, agriculture adaptation, and mitigation. So how can we use agriculture? How can we adapt agriculture to climate change? How can we use agriculture to mitigate the climate change? And finally, we are arguing to set up an international working group to monitor a world food situation and catalyze action. We learned a hard lesson during 2007-2008 crisis because of lack of information on trade, on stocks, on prices. There were lots of speculations. There were lots of panic purchases and lots of panic trade bans. So we need to avoid that in the future. Let me come back to the first point, investing in productive social safety nets. So poor people need to be protected in short run when the food prices are high. But very importantly is how can we combine social protection with long-term growth for them, long-term production increase for smallholders and for the poor. So this is very critical. And we have seen some successes in different parts of the world, the Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. So combining social safety nets together with assets building is very critical. The second is to set up a global and regional strategic grain reserves. So what we are thinking is to create a global strategic reserves through the donations of some of the larger grain producers such as US, China, Canada, even some of the European countries. So they can donate some of grains to a global institutions like WFP. They actually even don't need to ship the grains to a central place. They can keep the grains in their stock, but WFP has drawing rights. So when the food price is moving higher, the WFP can really draw the stocks from these countries and ship them to some of the regional centers. So where they should have some regional reserves. So global reserves plus regional reserves. So when there is a drought or there is a floods in a region, so regional reserves can be moved to poorest country, poorest people very quickly. Meantime, the stocks in China, India, US, Canada can be drawn by WFP and shipped them to regional reserves. So regional reserves here in Horn of Africa, the World Bank, WFP are already working on that reserve. I argue that West Africa should also have a similar reserve, so that can help to protect the poor. And we have seen some regional initiatives already, and they have been quite successful. If you look at one of the charts I showed you before, in the latest round of global food price hikes, the rice price has not risen much. This is because major rice producing and consuming countries in Asia have been discussing of forming shared grain stocks, of forming a strategic reserve. So many countries in the region have already donated 1 million tons of rice. So sitting there to be ready to be used to calm down regional food prices and to ship the grains into poorest country, poorest region, or poorest people. So that really helped. And then that region has also discussed about not using trade barriers to starve your neighbor. So no country is allowed to impose trade bans in rice-producing Asian region. And thirdly, they have also coordinated the national stocks during the food crisis. So when the rice price began to move up in March, April this year, many countries in Asia, like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, began to release their national stocks to their national market. So that really helped to calm down the domestic prices and then international prices. And again, as I said, we need to support transparent, fair, and open trade. During 2007-2008 crisis, the rice trade bans in China, India, and to some extent Vietnam and Thailand increased rice price by 100% during 2 to 3 months. Just in 2 to 3 months, the rice price more than doubled. And that really hurt lots of people, not only in Asia, but also Africa. So Africa faced double the importing price in 2007, 2008. So many people here in the region suffered from hunger, from malnutrition, because of trade bans in Asia. So we needed to make sure that these trade bans will not be used. We need to make sure that trade will remain to be open. And to promote agriculture growth, especially smallholder productivity. So we needed to invest in agriculture R&D, in rural infrastructure, so smallholders can access the technology, seeds, and the markets. And to promote innovations for smallholders through financial services, risk management mechanisms, institutional arrangements such as producers' cooperatives. So there are many innovations we can use to help smallholders to access to markets, insurance, financial services. IFPRI study shows that investment in agriculture research has highest return in terms of agriculture growth, that's food security, and also in terms of poverty reduction. So this is true in Asia, and this is also true in many parts of Africa. And rural infrastructure is another good investment together with the rural education. So agriculture research investment in rural infrastructure, and rural education are the best investments in terms of promoting food security and poverty reduction. And the investment in new technology has high payoffs. We know that land will be limited. We know that demand will increase. So new technology provides great potential to meet that gap. Some of the examples here in the region, for example, smallholder cassava production in Nigeria. This is largely due to our sister centers work, IATA's work. So improved cassava varieties, advanced in pest control, processing technology in mid-90s to early 1990s. So that initiative really tripled the cassava production in less than 10 years. And the farmer net profits increased by 18 times. And returns to neighbor increased by more than 60%. And farmers increased their income. The gender gap has also been narrowed. So generated a significant technology spillover even to Ghana. So not only in Nigeria. So technology can spill over across different countries. Then investment in climate change. So this region, Sahel region and Senegal, will be affected by climate change in a substantial way. So we needed to adapt agriculture to the climate change, a change of planting dates because temperature patterns, precipitation patterns change. So we need to adapt our the planting season, planting dates to these new dates. And we do need to introduce the more resilient crop varieties, so against the droughts, and improve the water storage. So water will become even more limited. So we needed to innovate how can we save water. The mitigation. So mitigation provides great opportunity for agriculture. So agriculture accounts for more than 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emission. So agriculture is part of the problem, but it should also be part of the solution. So global climate change funds should be used, and this part of the funds should be used for agriculture to adapt and to mitigate the climate change. And there are win-win-win opportunities. So we needed to make sure that agriculture investments can be targeted to, on the one hand, to adapt to climate change, on the other hand, to mitigate the climate change, and also make sure that smallholders will benefit from these strategies. IFPRI study shows that just to adapt agriculture to climate change, to offset the negative impact from climate change, there is a need of $7 billion a year. So $7 billion a year is needed to offset the negative impact from climate change per year. The international working group, as I said, during 2007-2008 food crisis, nobody predicted the crisis, and then nobody has effectively responded to the crisis. Why is that? We need a global system to monitor, to track, and to predict crisis, and to analyze how we can respond to the crisis, and catalyze action and intervention. So now there is a group that consists of the World Bank, WFP, IFAD, and IFPRI that have been working with G8, G20 very closely in proposing an agenda of food security for the G8, G20 discussion in this year. But we need more analysis, more investment to provide timely information, timely analysis, so that policymakers can make wise and quick decisions. So proactive steps must be taken now to reduce food price volatility and to prevent recurring of food crisis. So if we don't take these urgent actions, I'm afraid that food prices will continue to rise and become more volatile, and more people, particularly women and children, will suffer from the higher prices. So more people will go hungry and are more malnourished in the future. Okay, thank you very much.